Westminster Abbey, the 23rd of April, 1702. A woman of 37 is carried into the coronation of her own reign, seated in an open chair, because her legs can no longer be trusted to hold her. The crowds see a queen at the beginning of everything, a new monarch, a new century, a country about to become an empire. What they do not see is that the body being carried up the aisle has already been broken by years of childbearing, that this woman has buried almost every child she ever carried, and that the illness quietly destroying her will not have a name for another 300 years. This is the story of Anne, the last Stuart monarch, a queen whose own body waged a long private war against her, and whose greatest tragedy was hidden inside the one thing a queen was expected to do above all others: produce an heir. Anne was born on the 6th of February, 1665, the second surviving daughter of James, Duke of York, younger brother of King Charles II. Her family sat on the great fault line running through England, the crack between Protestant and Catholic that had already produced a civil war and a beheaded king. Her father was a Catholic in a country that had come to fear Catholicism as a matter of survival. And so Anne, by the direct order of her uncle the king, was raised firmly Protestant. That single decision, made when she was a small child, would shape the rest of her life and the future of the crown. In 1683, at the age of 18, Anne was married to Prince George of Denmark. By every worldly measure, George was unremarkable, quiet, heavy, not clever, and a favourite target of the witty men of the London court. But the marriage that looked so unpromising became the steadiest thing in Anne's entire life. For 25 years, through a scale of grief that would have broken most marriages, George stayed close to her, loyal and gentle and constant. He is the quiet figure standing beside her through the whole of this story, because so much of what came later was Anne trying to survive without him. And now we come to the heart of it, the part of Anne's life that is almost unbearable to lay out plainly. Between 1684 and 1700, Anne was pregnant at least 17 times. Let that number sit for a moment. 17 pregnancies in 16 years. The majority ended in miscarriage or in a child born dead. 5 children were born alive, and 4 of those died before they reached the age of 2. In one single, monstrous stretch of days, in February 1687, she lost 2 little daughters, Mary and Anne Sophia, within hours of one another. She was 22 years old. Only one of all those children lived past infancy. He was William, Duke of Gloucester, born in July 1689, and from his first weeks he was fragile, suffering convulsions as a newborn and growing up with what was almost certainly fluid on the brain. But he lived. Through the 1690s, he was the single thread from which the entire Protestant succession hung, the one surviving grandchild of a king. Anne watched over him with the ferocity of a mother who had already buried more children than most people ever have. And then, in July 1700, a few days after his 11th birthday, William took a fever, and within days he was dead. With him died the direct line. The Stuart dynasty now had no future running through her body, and Parliament was forced to legislate one, steering the eventual crown to a distant Protestant cousin in Germany. Anne was not yet even queen, and already the succession had been steered away from her own blood, because her own blood kept dying. Through these years of loss, Anne leaned on one person more than any other, a woman named Sarah Churchill. Sarah was clever, beautiful, sharp-tongued, and utterly sure of herself. Everything the shy and stammering Anne was not, and Anne loved her with an intensity that leaps off the page of their letters. To strip away the awkwardness of rank, the two women wrote to each other under invented names. Anne was Mrs. Morley. Sarah was Mrs. Freeman. For years, Sarah was the great emotional centre of Anne's life, closer to her than almost anyone but George, and that is exactly why its collapse would hurt so much. Anne became queen in March 1702, and here is the cruel arithmetic of her reign. As a monarch, she presided over extraordinary national triumph, while as a woman, she was falling apart. In 1707, the Act of Union joined England and Scotland into a single kingdom, Great Britain, and Anne became its first sovereign. Her armies, led by Sarah's husband, the Duke of Marlborough, won staggering victories against the France of Louis XIV. Above all at Blenheim in 1704, a battle so celebrated that the nation built the general a palace and named it after it. And through all of it, Anne was in torment. From her 30s, she suffered from what her contemporaries called gout, agonizing pain that settled in her limbs and later spread. She grew very heavy and increasingly immobile, sometimes unable to walk at all, carried between rooms in chairs. The Queen who ruled over Blenheim and the Union was often a woman in constant pain, grieving a nursery full of dead children. Then, in October 1708, George died. The faithful husband, the one steady presence across 25 years and 17 pregnancies, was gone, and Anne was shattered. And it was precisely here, in the rawest grief of her life, that her great friendship broke apart. Sarah Churchill, by now more interested in politics than in tenderness, chose this moment to hector the widowed Queen, and even, by her own later account, to scold her for the depth of her mourning. Into the gap stepped a quieter woman, Abigail Masham, a poor relation whom Sarah herself had once helped bring to court, offering Anne the calm and gentleness Sarah no longer would. Sarah, watching her influence drain away, reacted with fury, at one point hinting in writing that the Queen's fondness for Abigail was something scandalous and unnatural. On the 6th of April, 1710, the two women who had signed themselves Mrs. Morley and Mrs. Freeman met for the very last time. Sarah begged to know what she had done to lose her friend. Anne would only repeat that she would make no answer, that Sarah might put her complaints in writing. Behind that wall of cold politeness, a friendship of nearly 30 years simply ended. Within a year, Sarah was stripped of her offices and gone from court for good. Anne had buried her children, her husband, and now her closest friend. Anne's own end came on the 1st of August, 1714, at Kensington Palace. She was 49. In her final days, a stroke robbed her of speech. Her body was so swollen by the end that, according to those who saw the funeral arrangements, she had to be buried in a coffin that was almost square, carried into Westminster Abbey and laid beside George and near the children she had lost. With her death, the Stuart line that had begun in 1603 came to its end, and the crown passed to the House of Hanover. For 3 centuries, the question of what actually happened inside Anne's body hung unanswered. Her contemporaries had their words: gout, dropsy, a weak constitution. But those words explained nothing about why a healthy young woman should lose child after child. It is only modern medicine, looking back across 300 years, that has offered a possible answer. A number of doctors and historians have argued that Anne's pattern of repeated pregnancy loss, joint pain, and fatal stroke fits a condition unknown to her own age, an autoimmune disorder called antiphospholipid syndrome, sometimes bound up with lupus, in which the body's own defenses attack a pregnancy from within. It has to be said plainly what this is: a retrospective diagnosis, argued from second-hand descriptions, and impossible to prove on a woman dead since 1714. But if it is right, It means the great tragedy of Anne's life was not bad luck and not the will of God, as her own age believed, but a single hidden illness that no physician alive could have seen or named, destroying her children before they were ever born. That is the thing that stays with you about Anne. History remembers her, when it remembers her at all, as a name on an age, a somewhat dim figure between more glamorous reigns. What that name hides is one of the loneliest lives any British monarch ever lived. A woman carried to her own coronation, who ruled a triumphant nation from inside a failing body, who conceived 17 times and was survived by not one child. If this story stayed with you, the next one on this channel follows another royal woman and another nursery that decided the fate of a dynasty. A young princess, adored by an entire nation, whose single death in childbirth plunged a country into mourning and forced the crown down an entirely different path. Subscribe if you want to keep following these stories as they come out, and tell me in the comments, if Anne had known the illness was in her blood and not in her fortune, would that knowledge have been a mercy or simply one more grief she had no power to change?